Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea DeHaan. I am the Outreach Coordinator for the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and we are thrilled to have you joining us for another installment to our pre-law series. I'm here with the CHAS pre-law advisor, Dan Matthews, who will be accompanying me during the hour. And we also have, of course, our featured guest, whom I will tell you about in just a moment. I do want to take a moment to tell you a few things related to housekeeping before we get started. Obviously, you're welcome to use the chat to say hello or to communicate any technical issues with us, but we do ask that you use the Q&A feature to ask your questions. That's the tab at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to focus on that at the end of our discussion today to pull your questions and make sure that we ask them of our guests, so please use that for us. And you can find information about today's event or any of our future events at our CHAS Alumni Lunch Series page. I'll also mention that you'll notice that I do have the closed captions turned on today. If you personally don't need them or don't want to read them at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to adjust those in your own Zoom settings at the bottom using the CC tab. So I want to tell you a little bit about our guest today before turning the time over to him. Tyler Buswell is a shareholder and commercial real estate attorney at the law firm of Kirton McConkie in Salt Lake City. He has a nationwide legal practice and has advised clients on real estate transactions valued in the billions of dollars. His clients include national and local leaders in real estate investment and development, including Intermountain Healthcare, Extra Space Storage, City Creek Center, Fieldstone Homes, and Ivory Homes, among others. He holds a bachelor's in American Studies from Utah State and earned his law degree at the University of Utah. And Tyler, we're just so pleased that you're making time for us today in what is, I'm sure, a busy day in your schedule, but we're thrilled to have you here. And I know we have students who will want to hear more about your experience. So I'm going to turn the time over to you.
Thanks, Andrea. And it's good to be here. Good to be with all of you. I graduated in 2005 from Utah State, in American Studies. And essentially my minor was in political science. So I, came out of out of undergrad, not knowing exactly what I was going to do. And I loved, hearing people that had graduated and had a liberal arts degree like me, be able to, what have they done in the world? What was their career like? Because I didn't entirely know what my career was going to be like. So I just want to jump right in with just a very short PowerPoint presentation to kind of spur some discussion, give you a little bit of introduction about what I do and what my practice actually is. I just want to give you sort of a sense of what it is to be a real estate attorney. And I want to first start off with this analogy is that a lot of times you hear people talk about, that they're a corporate attorney. And I remember actually when I was an undergrad at Utah State, that a lot of people said, oh, I want to go to law school. And people would say, well, what type of attorney do you want to be? And they would say a corporate attorney. Well, that term doesn't really mean much to a lot of people. In the legal practice, in particular at large firms, a corporate attorney means that you are doing work for transactional work for entities, and a lot of times it could also include like doing SEC filings or security work. So kind of corporate and securities work. That's what a true corporate attorney is. But a lot of times people say corporate attorney, and they really just mean they represent large companies. So large law firms like my law firm, Kirton McConkie, we're the largest firm in Utah. We've got about 160 attorneys in 4 different offices in Salt Lake, Lehigh, St. George, and then we actually just added an office in Boise, Idaho this last year. But firms like my firm and larger, I'd say kind of 100 attorneys and larger, we're kind of all corporate attorneys in the sense that we're all working for large law firms or for large companies. And that's what we do all day, every day. But then the areas of practice at these kind of corporate law firms like my firm, Kirton McConkie, you end up being very specialized. So, if you're like a tax attorney, like you do not do things other than tax, right? You only do tax. If you are doing large commercial litigation, you only do large commercial litigation. If you're doing intellectual property, you're only doing intellectual property. And my work, I'm a commercial real estate attorney. I only do commercial real estate. And really in the practice of law, there's all these different practice areas that I just mentioned a number of them on, which are really just areas of the law. And again, at large law firms, you become kind of an expert in these different types of area. But the analogy I wanted to use here is just dealing with crap. Large law firms, large corporate attorneys, and I say corporate not in the sense that most attorneys use it, but the way people that aren't attorneys just say, oh, if you're representing large corporations, those type of attorneys, we're essentially all we are is we are plumbers for really big companies and rich people. That's it. And because we're all just dealing with a bunch of crap that the companies and the rich people do not want to deal with. Okay. And there really are kind of two, as far as like the day-to-day practice, again, there's lots of different practice areas, but the day-to-day practice is kind of broken up into just two specific types of practice. One is transactional, you'll hear people say that, and the other is litigation. And the analogy, again, for like kind of using the plumbing analogy, the best way to think about it is, a lot of times there's two types of plumbers. There is a plumber that designs the system, that figures out how you're going to move crap from one place efficiently out of your house, out of the building to some other place so that there's no problems, right? The crap moves in an efficient manner from one location to the other. Okay, that's one type of plumber. They're designing the system, they're building the system, they're making the pipes, they're doing all of the different things behind the scenes so that the crap works and it moves out so nobody has to see it. Okay, so that's one type of plumber. The other type of plumber is somebody that a pipe is broken and there is crap all over, and you got to figure out what happened. What happened? Who's at fault? What's the problem? And you gotta, and then you gotta fix it. You gotta try and solve that problem, okay? Transactional attorneys, we design the plumbing system, okay? There are lots of, and I am a transactional attorney, we try and figure out all of the problems that could happen before they happen, right? So we understand the laws, we think about the laws, we're drafting documents, we're negotiating agreements to make sure that, because there are lots of ways that these large multi-million, sometimes billion-dollar transactions, there's lots of things that can go wrong. And we're trying to prevent that before problems happen. And if we've done it right, all of the potential crap is essentially already solved, right? You just don't have to deal with it. But sometimes deals go bad, businesses fail, people disagree, just stuff does not work out like everybody thought. Well, that's like the pipe broke, okay? And there's crap all over. And the litigator, that's when the litigator comes up. They're the type of plumber that fixes a leak or a break or something that's wrong. They have to come in, figure out what happened, why it broke, who's at fault, how do we fix it? Now they're dealing with crap too, right? But they're just dealing with it after, a problem happened. So it's really the perspective of, in either instance, you go to law school and you are thinking about all of these very complex, interesting issues, things that can go wrong. But really, it kind of falls into two camps. Either you're transactional, you're designing a system, you're trying to solve, proactively solve problems before they happen, or you're a litigator and there's a problem has happened and you're trying to solve, the mistake, right? Whatever happened, what's screwed up, and how do we clean this thing up, okay? But in either instance, just know that attorneys, we deal with a bunch of crap. That the reason why they pay us by the hour is and they pay us a lot in some instances, is because we're doing stuff that other people just do not want to deal with. Okay. So I just wanted to give you that little background of like working at a big law firm. Like it's really important to keep that in mind. And just so you know, I like my job. I enjoy it. It's very interesting. But there are some real crazy, weird things. And there is just a lot of things that I'm dealing with that my client loves, that they can pay me by the hour to deal with these problems, because it's just literally crap they don't want to deal with. Okay. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about some different projects I've worked on so that you can get a sense of what it means to be a transactional real estate attorney. So the first case study that I'm going to talk to you about is City Creek Center. So I would assume that a lot of you have been to City Creek Center in downtown Salt Lake. It's 2.5 blocks of prime real estate right in the middle of Salt Lake City. It's actually called Block 74, Block 75, and Block 76 in Salt Lake City. You have 2 blocks. I guess I'll go to the next slide and tell you a little bit more about it. So just as a little background for those of you that don't know, or if you do know, I'll give you a little bit more insight to what the project is and what I did on the project. So I kind of told you the size. So there's retail, there's office, there's industrial. There are 8 separate office towers within the project. A 9th tower is currently being built. If you've been to downtown Salt Lake recently, at 95 South State Street, they're building a 24-story office building that's currently going in. And it was part of the original plan for City Creek, and it's just never been built to now. There's actually 2 more towers that were also part of the original plan for City Creek that might also go in, and they're not sure if they're going to be residential or office, or maybe they'll be built, maybe they won't be built. It just depends on demand and market forces, and there's lots of other things that go into it. But they have a lot of these towers, so that's the office space. You have 3 condominium projects that it's over 400 units. I think originally it was like 430 or 440 units. I can't remember the exact number, but those projects are called Richards Court, where there's about 90 units. If you know where Blue Lemon is, the tower right above Blue Lemon is one tower of Richards Court, and then right across kind of the courtyard there is Deseret Book, and right above that is the rest of that. It's the other office tower, the East Tower of Richards Court. Then you have 99 West. That's the building on the corner of West Temple and South Temple. It's a beautiful light brick building. I think it's 30 stories, if I remember right. And there are 185 condo units in that project. And then there was about 150 units in what's called the Regent at City Creek Condos, which is a really cool modern building located between State Street and Main Street along First South. So those are the 3 condo buildings within City Creek. If you've been to City Creek, you may have looked up and not known what those buildings are. Again, there's 8 office towers and then 3 condominium buildings. Then there is what you guys most people know is the retail center. So what most people think of when they think of City Creek Center, they're just thinking about kind of the mall area. So you've got shops, restaurants, all sorts of stuff. And that is the developer, City Creek Reserve Inc. is the owner of all the land, which is a subsidiary of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's a real estate development company, so it is in fact a separate entity. They do not operate the retail center. It is leased by an airspace lease to the operator, to a company out of Michigan that operates malls and shopping centers all over the country. And so they're actually they enter into leases with people, but they take care of essentially the center as a whole. What most people think of as City Creek Center is the retail area, and that's not actually managed or done anything with by the owner of the land. There's a lease to somebody else. Okay. The next thing is there are 3 restaurants that actually own their property. And when I say property, they really own airspace, which is I'd be happy to talk more about, but think about they don't own the land underneath, but they own like a cube of airspace. It's like owning a condominium. When you own a condominium, you don't own the entire building. You own just this cube of space. And there are 3 restaurants that own their cube of space within the project, and which is very unique and very something that's not very typical in Utah, but it's very typical actually in New York. It's very typical in LA. It's typical in a lot of large markets. It's just not something in Salt Lake people do very often. There is a large apartment building. If you're on State Street, if you look to the west, there's I can't remember how many units. It's a 150, 200. City Creek Landing, I should know this number, but I don't recall. But City Creek Landing is a large apartment complex that's just on the west side of State Street, just kind of in the middle of the block, as part of City Creek as well. Then you have the Macy's grocery store, which is between State Street and 2nd East, along First South. So that is technically part of the City Creek Center project. You also have one hotel. You have the Marriott Hotel, which existed before City Creek was built, but is still there. So that's the Marriott Hotel on First South and West Temple, kind of on that corner. And then underlying all of it, you have 4 levels of underground parking in the entire project, which is, the reason why they had to demolish everything. If anybody recalls, in the mid 2000s, what they did is there was all existing things here, but they kept some of the buildings, but almost everything else they entirely demolished and then dug down, 100 feet, 150 feet to then put in this very sophisticated underground parking. So that's what the project is. So me as an attorney, what I helped on this, and my team that I was on, essentially we figured out legally and set up all of the documentation to make it work. So we drafted development agreements. We negotiated construction agreements. We drafted easements to allow people, access in and out of property. If there were going to be shared uses between, the apartments and an office building, well, who has those rights, and when do they have those rights, and when, if somebody causes damage, who pays for it? If there's repair that needs to be done, who's responsible? And this goes, you start thinking about all of the different uses. Well, how does the parking interplay with the retail? And then how does the retail interplay with the office? And how does the office interplay with the residential? You have all of these different shared uses, and how do they all fit together? And we had hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents that we drafted and negotiated with all of the different relevant parties to make this happen. So again, so let me just give you one simple example of just the complexities of legal documents of what's needed. So when I said like an access easement, so that gives somebody the right to, to go on the property of another person. Well, when you have these mixed uses, everybody needs emergency egress. They need to get out of their building or out of their apartment or wherever they are, out of the, grocery store. They have to leave. If there's a fire or there's an earthquake or whatever, you got to get out. Well, how do you get out? A lot of times when you get out, you're going to leave and you're immediately going to be on somebody else's property. So we had to negotiate and draft agreements between the different uses and say, okay, well, if you're in this office building and you have to leave through an emergency exit, and you end up in a residential property, and then you have to go through that residential property's, stairs, then you have to leave their stairs and go into a parking building before you go outside. Well, we need an agreement that allows everybody to do that, okay? So that's just a very simple example of all of the different things that are involved when you have a very complex agreement like this. So, and let me give you another example that I had here on kind of the case study was property taxes. Well, normally you have property taxes for a single parcel, a single tax parcel. But here there are so many different complex uses. Well, Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City, they want to get whatever taxes they can based on use, and property taxes a lot of times are based on use. So what we had to do is we had to create new tax parcels so that each use was taxed correctly. If it was a restaurant, we needed to make sure that they paid property taxes as a restaurant, not property taxes as a parking garage, because parking garages are taxed in a different way than a restaurant is. And an office building is taxed in a different way, right? So there's all of these different ways that taxes are assessed. And as the attorneys on this deal, we had to figure all of that out and work with Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County to create new tax parcels so that taxing was done properly. We also didn't want to pay too much in taxes, right? So you want to pay the right amount of taxes, what you're supposed to pay. Another example that I want to share with you of, again, just of kind of what the legal complexities that you have to deal with in a project like City Creek is there are building codes and fire codes about whether or not if you cross a property boundary, you have to have certain protections to make sure if there is in fact a fire, as an example, that the fire doesn't spread. So, well, what do you do if there is an escalator that goes across a property boundary, which is what happens when you have a multi-use project like this? There are lots of different uses and you're crossing property boundaries all the time. So how do you deal with that? Well, what you have to do is you actually have to build infrastructure that allows you to contain fires in a way that you normally wouldn't do it, or the city building inspector won't allow you to do it. So we had to identify all of the places where that might be a problem and then work with the architects, the engineers, and the builders to develop it in such a way so that it actually could be constructed. And then the last thing that I think is a good example is that you need city approval to do all of this, and a lot of times county approval as well. So, I started at Kirton McConkie in law school in 2007, and I started here full time after I graduated from law school in 2008. And City Creek, at the time, they were still doing demolition in 2007. And in fact, I don't know, I think it was 2009-ish, maybe 2010, when they actually finished demolition and started building. But my first couple of years of practice, one of the things that I was responsible for was I would submit applications to Salt Lake City for development. So for like the condo projects, the 3 condo projects, I had to prepare all of the materials to get approval from Salt Lake City to develop these condominium projects. And that included, plat documents, covenants, conditions, and restrictions that were going to be recorded on the property. I had to get, submit it to the city, and they had to give notice to all of the neighbors, and any neighboring property owner could actually come in and raise issues and try and stop certain pieces of the development. Although the master plan for City Creek had been approved, and I want to say 2006, 2007, each piece of the project still needed to be developed and approved by Salt Lake City. So as each phase came online, as the junior guy, I was the guy that they sent to the city, and I would have to work with the planning department to get all of the approvals so that we could do construction and we could build the project. So that's just an example, again, of all the types of issues. Again, I'm not litigating, but I'm looking at laws and I'm trying to solve problems so that my client could build this really cool, multi-use project in downtown Salt Lake City. The next project that I thought would be a good little case study to talk about was a medical facility that I helped for Intermountain Healthcare. So Intermountain Healthcare a couple of years ago wanted to, right now there's only one primary children's hospital here in Salt Lake City, but they wanted to do another primary children's hospital. And they were looking at areas of growth in the state of Utah, and they decided to go to Lehigh. Well, there was a large developer down there that was doing a master project, and they decided, hey, this is where we want to do this. And so this is a little map of the project. It's been under construction for about a year and a half, I believe. So they wanted to purchase, this is where I got involved a number of years ago. They wanted to purchase this 38-acre site in Lehigh. And there were tons of issues. You just think, oh, well, they just wanted to buy some property. But when they wanted to buy it, there was technically no access rights to get on the property at the time. And so again, this needs to be approved by the city. There's certain infrastructure that needs to be built to be able to do that. So that's something that when I was working with Intermountain Healthcare to try and build the project and buy the asset, we had to figure out, okay, how can we make sure we have access rights? So it was working with the city as well as the master developer to make sure it could be done. Another interesting issue that came up that isn't just like just buying the land is that the master developer, they were building kind of all of the roads, the utilities, the curb, the gutter, the sidewalk, the lighting, kind of all of the infrastructure around the project. So although Intermountain Healthcare was going to develop their own 38 acres, everything around the site was going to be developed by the master developer. But Intermountain wanted to purchase it and start working, start building the hospital as quick as they could. So, so we had to work with the master developer to say, hey, part of our purchase price was that you were going to do all of this other development, but we need to make sure you do it. So when we purchased the property, we negotiated and they executed a post-closing agreement that would allow the master developer to do, millions of dollars worth of work, so that it was completed in such a way that then Intermountain could actually use their site like they wanted to after, they had developed their site. So again, that happens sometimes in development deals, and it happens actually a lot in Intermountain development deals. But this was just a real unique one because it's a large campus. It's really important that they had all this infrastructure. And it was something that we worked on for a long time. Other issues that came up were just kind of shared uses. I kind of already talked about, that you have these neighboring property owners, and who has the right to hook into the utilities, who has the right to use the roads. Well, we had to negotiate and draft documents about who would use them and how they would use them, and if there's repairs that need to be made, who pays for that. There's always city kind of development issues that we had to work through, and very similar to like City Creek, we had to go to Lehigh City and say, hey, here's the plans, here's what we want to do. We had to make sure the zoning was acceptable. We had to get building permits and approvals, and that was something we had to work through. It's not just that you buy the property and then you can start building. There's lots of other legal requirements, and attorneys like me, we help clients work through those legal requirements. Another thing that is very unique to Intermountain Healthcare is they're always trying to make sure that there are positive health initiatives around their projects. So in particular, if you ever go around an Intermountain hospital or other campus, they always try and have like walking trails and certain landscaping and things like that, so that when it's either patients or patients' families or even their employees are there, that they, if they want to work out, or they just want to be in a place that's peaceful, Intermountain does their development from the outset. They're thinking about all of those issues. Well, if you do, and this project, I can't remember if this project was one of them, but I think they did have something along these lines. But there's been a number of Intermountain healthcare projects that I've worked on where they kind of put in like a sidewalk that goes around the facility. And so people can, like their employees or patients or whatever, can go outside and walk around and get a little bit of exercise. Well, a lot of times the public comes and uses that. So then they have to enter into an agreement with the city to say, hey, we're going to provide this and the public can come use this. It's essentially a public sidewalk. But we don't want liability from the public. We don't want a bunch of people suing us because of this. We want this to be a public good, a public benefit. And how do you negotiate that with the city in a way that works for them and also works for Intermountain? The other thing that this site, in fact, I can go back and you can see a little bit here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see this area over here. This is part of the site and it's not currently developed. Well, Intermountain Healthcare is always thinking about long-term growth potential, right? They're not buying land and developing land just to make money. They're thinking, hey, in the next 50 years, what is the growth of this area going to be? And how can we plan for future development? And they're very thoughtful about that from the outset. And so as their legal counsel, we have to also help kind of advise them on how can you develop this in a way that is going to look nice, is going to be beneficial. The city will will approve it. It doesn't violate zoning, and still allow you to develop in the future. So those are just sort of a case study of things that I do to give you an example of the type of projects I work on. And then the last one I wanted to just share was an agricultural transaction. About 30-ish, 35% of my work is large agricultural transactions around the country. And this is one example. Had a client that purchased what's called the Wine Cup Gamble Ranch in in northeastern Nevada, just right along the Utah border. So you can see this is a little map here, and I mean, it is a massive, massive ranch. So it's about approximately 1 million acres of land. Not all of it is owned. About half of the land is actually owned by the federal government, but it's subject to grazing leases that allow Wine Cup Gamble to graze the property. Okay. But there are a lot of very complex property rights associated with large ranches and farms. So again, just talking about grazing, I mean, grazing, you think that's really simple, and it is in a lot of ways, but you have if you have a grazing lease with a neighboring property owner, or the Bureau of Land Management, or U.S. Forestry, or there's lots of different federal or state agencies you might have leases with. There's hunting rights. Hunting rights are worth millions and millions of dollars on these large ranches. People pay tons and tons of money to go to ranches and farms to hunt. And this is the case. It's not just in Utah or in Nevada. It's literally all over the country. I have some clients that own property in Florida, Georgia, other places in the South, and some of them make more money off their hunting rights than they do off of farming and ranching. That's how valuable some of the hunting rights are. Then there's oil, gas, and mineral rights. Sometimes you have them, sometimes you don't. In the Wine Cup Gamble Ranch, it was very complex. And when my client was purchasing the property, we had to figure out where did my client actually own oil, gas, and mineral rights, and where did they not? And it took months and months and months of reviewing documents and figuring it out so that we could give them legal advice about, you can sell an oil and gas, you can sign up an oil and gas lease on this property here, this portion of your property, but on this other portion of the property, you can't. You don't own the mineral rights there. Somebody else owns them, and they have the right to give leases. You own the surface estate, and you can graze cows out here, but you can't dig in the dirt for oil and gas because you don't own the rights. With farms and ranches, there's always tons of boundary issues. Wine Cup Gamble was no different. There's, farmers put fences in the wrong place, and there's just all sorts of issues. Water rights is always an issue in the West and in farming and ranching, and understanding what rights to water you actually have. Sometimes it's rights from a river. Sometimes it's rights from irrigation canals. Sometimes it's rights, from just pumping it out of the ground. If you have water wells. So there's lots of different nuances to that we have to advise clients on. Interestingly enough, I don't do intellectual property, but sometimes it comes up in farms and ranches because you have brands and trademarks and things that are very unique to these farms and ranches. If you go to Costco, next time you go to Costco and you walk around the produce, you will see that every company has a very unique mark of saying, this is who they are. And one example that I can give you is, if you ever buy, what are they called? Baby carrots. Most baby carrots in America are made, it's a company called Grimway Farms, and their main brand is called Cal Organic. So if you go to Costco, Cal Organic those are the baby carrots you can get from Costco. And that is a very specific brand that they spent tons and tons of money developing. It's not one of my clients, but I've dealt with them. I've been to some of their facilities in California and Washington. I know them well. And they have very unique branding and technologies related to how they grow carrots, how they prepare carrots, and how they package carrots. And all of that is intellectual property issues. And so on the Wine Cup Gamble, we didn't have that, but we did have branding issues because there's a very old brand that they've used for 100+ years out there that we had to make sure we had the rights to, we could continue to use, and that my client would ultimately have the benefit on. And the last thing that I wanted to tell you, goes back to my examples of crap. On this property, there was a huge event where it was like February, and there was a very early kind of thaw. and there's tons of snow that melted, and a major dam that had been on the property for 80 years failed, and the water just destroyed, railroads, roads, tons of infrastructure all over the property. Well, at the time, my client was under contract to sell it to somebody else. And we had a contract that governed how, if there was an event like this, what was the buyer's rights and what were the seller's rights onto how to resolve the insurance claim and who got the proceeds. And we fought over who had those rights, but it was one of those things that we had in a document beforehand that essentially we weren't thinking about that issue, but we had already tried to address that issue. And we literally had drafted a document that we could take to the court and say, here is how we agreed that we were going to solve this problem. And we agreed to it well before this issue happened. So judge, this is how you should solve it. Okay. So those are just a couple of examples I have of my practice and what I do. Again, I spend most of my days, day to day. It's very much, I'm on phone calls, I'm on video conferences. Before COVID, I would go to lots of meetings, and essentially I would advise clients on how to minimize their legal risk and how can we draft documents to solve problems on large real estate transactions before they ever happen. And again, it's a pretty narrow niche. I don't know anything about family law. I don't know anything about criminal law, but I know a lot about large commercial real estate transactions and any weird legal issue that might come up, because I spend all day, every day thinking about what could go wrong, how can we solve it, and how can we get a deal done and move things forward, even though, crap happens, right? Even though there's problems. So with that, I'm certainly open to answering questions or having discussion. I hope that, gives you a good flavor of what my practice is like. Again, it's pretty unique. In Salt Lake City, there's probably 40 attorneys that do what I do. It's not a big thing, but there are lots of companies that need that type of expertise. And so I think that's all I've got to say on that. But like I said, certainly open to suggestions. I guess was there some chat things here, Dan?
Yeah, there is. Our first one is actually one we get a lot with the different types of law we hear about. What kind of person does someone need to be to enjoy this type of work?
I don't know that there's any specific type of person for what I do. The initial training, when you first come out of law school, the training to do what I do, you generally are sitting in your office, reading contracts and drafting contracts all day, every day for a couple of years. So you better like to read, you better have good reading comprehension, you better like to write, those, and just be a good communicator. Those are all really important things. You do have to be good at researching and, but those are just kind of initial skills. And the truth is, long term, I do a lot less of that. Most of my days now, I'd say 70-80% of my day, I'm on phone calls or in meetings or just negotiating and working through issues. And I have, junior attorneys that are doing all of my drafting, like the actual drafting of the documents. They do the documents, then they send it to me and I review it and make sure it's in the right form before I send it off to the client. So when I say, I just give you that as a little background, because I think sometimes you think, oh, well, this is what you're going to do your whole career. And the truth is it's not. The more senior you get in a lot of these types of practices, your work changes. And so I know, like, some of my litigation partners, when they were young associates, when they were first starting in, out of law school, they did lots of just case law and drafting motions for the court, but they didn't really go to court very often. But now they actually go to court all the time, and they aren't drafting because the junior attorneys are doing a lot of that, the drafting and the researching, and they're doing more of the strategy and oral argument and those sorts of things. So I'm sorry, that's probably not a great answer, but I would say I do think being a really good communicator, no matter what, is really important. And I do think understanding that the first couple of years is a really, really steep learning curve. And so you are doing some things that are not as fun, but then you get the expertise and you get the understanding and you have that training, and then you're able over time to then be interacting with clients more and advising on a larger stage as compared to initially where you're just reviewing contracts and drafting contracts most of the time.
Forgot to unmute there. Here's one we received via email. It says, of all the attorneys you've been in contact with, what attributes would you say are typical of top tier attorneys?
A couple of attributes and skills that I think are really important. The one that I tell people that I think is so important is the ability to take a lot of information and synthesize it to what is truly most important. In a lot of in a legal context, you know, I may review a contract that's 50 pages long. If I send an email to my client saying, here are all the issues I see, and it's 5 pages of issues, I'm going to get fired, because you know what? There may be 5 pages worth of issues out of 50 pages. That there might be that many issues, but part of my job is advising my client what really matters. Like, what is most important? What is the thing that is really going to cause problems for you? And being able to synthesize and focus in on the 1, 2, 3, 4 most important issues is a skill that if you can do that, you're going to be really successful. And there are some people that just have a knack for that. There are people that coming right out of law school, some of my junior attorneys that work with me, they already know how to do that. I need them to identify the 5 pages of issues, right? You do have to identify all of them if you're a good attorney, but that's the easy part. That's the easy thing to do, is to identify the 5 pages. The hard thing to do is to then take all of those issues that you see and boil it down to just a couple of really important things. What really matters, okay? So I think being able to synthesize information and figure out what is most important is something that really good attorneys in what I do, like they are able to do that, and they do it very succinctly, very quickly, and they're just very, very good at it. So that's one. The other is you do have to just get along with people, right? I mean, it's like being a lawyer, it's a service job. Like, I am providing a service to people. And if I'm getting along with people, whether it's my colleagues, whether it's the attorney on the other side, whether it's my client, everybody, you have to be able to get along with people. And I would say, you know, there's kind of the stereotype that that attorneys are a-holes. And I do think there's a higher proportion of a-hole attorneys than kind of the general population, if I had to guess. But I would say in my practice, it's not, that's not the norm, because we are in fact incentivized to get deals done, right? If I go into a deal and because I'm being a jerk attorney, Intermountain Healthcare can't get a new hospital off the ground, they're going to fire me, right? Like that's a problem. I will not have clients if I am getting in the way of business deals, okay? And that's a really thing, that's something I really like about my job, is that I am incentivized to get along with people and to build, to build things, to build relationships, to build trust. that is really valuable. And I do, in litigation, sometimes that incentivized changes because you actually have clients that say, I don't care about the other side, be the biggest a-hole you want because, you know, they're jerks and, you know, do whatever you have to do because, you know, we got to win this and I don't care what they say. Right. But that's not general transactional law. You can't have that type of attitude. And you can't have that type of practice. So successful attorneys in what I do are people that can get along with folks. And again, it doesn't mean I don't disagree with attorneys on the other side. Sometimes we yell at each other. Sometimes we're mad. Like that absolutely happens. But even in those instances, we can still get along. I was actually on the call today with a guy that out of Chicago, where he and I did a deal a few years ago, and we now have clients working on a completely different deal, different clients, different year. And he and I, it was a really hard deal. And there were times we really got heated and it was very intense. And yet we got along the whole time. Like he knew I didn't have any animosity towards him. We still had a good relationship, even though it was tough. And so today we get on the call and it's like, we're old friends, you know, we're just chatting away and like, and that's again, so just another skill, just to be the ability to get along with folks. Again, whether they're on the other side of you or on the same side, whatever it is, you know, that is something that will really serve you well.
We've got two new ones that came in. What is your best advice for preparation for law school? And the other one I get all the time is, how did you choose which law school to go to? And did you like your choice? Would you do it again?
You know, preparation for law school, I think reading, just being good at reading. That is, reading and writing is like, that's it. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. Like, that's the way to prepare for law school, is reading and writing. And the skills that I was talking about earlier of kind of like what in law school they'll talk about is issue spotting, is like spotting every issue. That is really important in law school as well. And the truth is, a lot of your grade is based off of your ability to issue spot. But that's where earlier I was saying, one thing to be successful in my job, though, is not just issue spotting, it's then taking it to the next step of what's the most important issue. But I would tell you, identifying just the most important issue in law school doesn't necessarily help you get good grades. That helps you be a good attorney, but law school focuses more on issue spotting. So just reading, writing, issue spotting, that's how you prepare for law school. You know, law school is really hard, but it's also a lot of fun intellectually. I mean, it was stimulating. I really enjoyed my time in law school from an intellectual standpoint. It is crazy stressful because, different than undergrad, just so everybody knows, you don't get any feedback, okay? You will go all semester and they will give you, you're reading cases and you're going to class and you're getting grilled by professors on the cases you read. And then at the end of the semester, you take one test and your entire grade is based on that test. What you did in class, even if you looked like a moron every day in class, you may end up with a really good grade because you did well on the test. And the feedback that you're getting from the professor is getting grilled in class, but that actually has no bearing on your grade. And they don't have midterms. They just have a final, like, for the most part. Almost every class is just a final. And so that's something to just keep in mind and know that, different than undergrad, where you might have, you know, a paper or a midterm or something like that. And so mid-semester, you're able to get a feedback of like how well I'm doing. You don't get that in law school. And so just go in knowing that, be prepared for that, and kind of start planning from day one. Okay, I got to get ready for this final. How do I start getting ready for it? And you're preparing for it for what, 3 or 4 months. So it's a weird, it's a different dynamic than undergrad. So I'm sorry, that was probably a long rambling answer about how you prepare for law school, but, and sorry, Dan, there was a follow-up question. Was it, did you say how did I choose what law school to go to? Is that what it was? Based on your LSAT and your GPA, you can get a pretty good sense of what law schools you can get into, okay? So before I got my LSAT score, I was kind of thinking like, oh, well, if I could just go anywhere, if I could go to Harvard and Yale and I could go to anywhere in between, where would I go? What would I do? But the truth is, until you have your LSAT score, it's really not that helpful. Like, you need to take the LSAT and you need to look at your GPA after that to see whether or not, your realistic chances of getting in. And every law school, what they do is they give you a range of from 25% to 75% of GPA and LSAT. And if you're in that range somewhere, again, you could be at the 25th or you could be at the 75th, but as long as you're in that range, you've got a pretty good shot. Obviously, if you're higher than that, that's great. If you're lower than that, it doesn't mean you're not going to get in. It just means you have less than a 25% chance of getting in. Okay, so that's what those numbers mean. Again, it's not the end all, but that is important to know. So when I got my LSAT score back, I essentially was like, okay, well, I know what my GPA is. Here's what my LSAT is. Here are 10 schools that I would like to go to that I think I can get into. Okay, and I just applied to them. But here's the advice that I didn't get that I would like to give all of you, that I think is really important, is unless you are going to one of the top 10 or 15 schools in the country, okay, unless they are top 10 or 15 in US News World Report, most people that go to law school end up practicing law in the general geographic area of where their law school is located. So the law school has alumni connections and the ability to, network and things like that in that geographic area. So if you're not going to Harvard or Yale or Columbia or Stanford, or again, these kind of top 10 or 15 schools, if you go to the top 10 or 15 schools, you can go practice law anywhere you want. You can go anywhere in the country and do whatever you want, okay? But if you're not in those top 10 or 15 schools, you could still hypothetically go practice law wherever you want. But it's going to be harder to get a job outside of your geographic area where your law school is located, okay? I did not know this. This was, this is something I did not know and did not realize. I know this very well now. I am currently the head of the hiring committee here at Kirton McConkie. And we're in Utah. We're a big firm in Salt Lake. We hire 75+% of all of our attorneys from the University of Utah and BYU Law School. And there are people that apply from Harvard every year to Kirton McConkie. And there are people from Stanford that apply to Kirton McConkie every year. And there are people that go to University of Texas and University of Florida and USC and all these other great schools. But you know what? We hire most of our attorneys from the University of Utah and BYU. And every other firm in Salt Lake is the exact same. We all do this, okay? We hire a few here and there that went to some of these really good schools, or for other reasons, maybe they, went to University of Tennessee, which is a good school, kind of comparable to BYU or Utah. Maybe we have some tie with them or whatever. So it's not that we will not hire you, but even us as a very big firm in Salt Lake City, we are pretty specialized, and pretty much every market in America is the same. If you want to practice law in Colorado, you should go to the University of Colorado Law School, or you should go to Denver Law School. You should not go to the University of Utah. That is a mistake. If you want to practice law in Colorado, go to law school in Colorado. If you want to practice law in Arizona, go to Arizona State or go to Arizona. Do not go to University of Southern California. Don't go there. It's not a good move for you. If you want to practice law in LA, go to the University of Southern California. That's a great place to go. Okay. Or go to Harvard. If you can go to Harvard and end up in LA, good. You can, again, if you go to Harvard, you can go anywhere. You can go practice law wherever you want, right? So I just give you that advice in that I feel like there are so many people that decide they really want to go to law school and they don't think about this geographic limitation. I had a friend that really wanted to go to law school, and he didn't really care where he went to law school. So he ended up going to a law school in Oklahoma. And I can't even remember what law school it was in Oklahoma, but he always planned that he would come back and practice law in Salt Lake City. You know what? It's almost impossible to get a job from Oklahoma to Salt Lake City in practicing law. It's very, very difficult. It can be done, but you're most likely not going to get especially starting out, you're not going to get a great opportunity unless you kind of already have connections. So I really want to emphasize, do not go to a law school in a location where you do not want to live. But again, if you want to live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you want to practice law in Tulsa, Oklahoma, go to Tulsa Law School. It's a great law school, and people in Tulsa love law graduates from Tulsa. They think that's great. But if you want to practice in Salt Lake, do not go to Tulsa, because you are probably not going to get a job, or it will be very difficult for you to get a job. Okay. So that is one of my biggest pieces of advice. And the other piece of advice I would give you on just going to law school is, do think about your debt. I enjoyed law school. I enjoy the practice of law. I make a good living. I have a good, stable career. It's been very good to me. So I don't, things have worked out great. And I came out of law school with a decent amount of debt. I went to the University of Utah, so I was in state, so I was able to save some money there. But I still took out some pretty hefty loans when I was in law school. But it was a debt ratio that I knew I could pay off based on getting a job in Salt Lake and based on the legal market in Salt Lake. I knew it was something I could service. There are some people that essentially decide, I'm going to law school come hell or high water, and it doesn't matter where I go, and it doesn't matter what type of debt I take on, because eventually I'm going to make it all back. That may or may not be true. So if you can go to law school at a place that gives you a scholarship, is in a location that you want to go to, and you can come out with debt knowing that you're going to be able to pay it off and it's not going to ruin your life. I think law school is a wonderful investment, and it's a great experience, and the practice of law is very interesting and very unique. Okay. One of my really good friends was one of these people who decided he didn't want to go to law school in the West. So he went to Florida State, and he was married and he had a couple of kids, and I don't know the exact number, but I want to say it was hundreds of thousands of dollars, 150, 200,000, some very large amount of money, because he was an out-of-state student and he was married and he had kids and he wasn't working. He was just going to law school for 3 years. He has a great job back here in Utah, and he's done really well for himself. But his monthly student loan payment is higher than his house payment, and it still is. And he's been out of law school for 13 years. So just to give you a sense of the amount of debt that you can take on and how that hurts your life, you just need to be smart about it. Okay. Don't just think I can take on whatever debt. Okay. That's a mistake I've seen people make. So sorry, that was also a very long rambling answer, but hopefully that was helpful.
Excellent. We appreciate that. We don't have much time yet, but one thing I kind of wanted to touch on is that, you mentioned in your real estate, there's a lot of issues that you've dealt with, retail space and the rest of it. How much are you expected to know before that happens? How much are you expected to research while you're doing those particular cases?
At this point in my career, people hire me because of what I know, right? Because I have a really broad understanding of a ton of different issues. But when you're first starting out, they don't expect you to know anything, right? When we first hire attorneys, when they're starting out in our real estate group, and when I was hired here in the real estate group, I didn't know anything. I knew the general stuff that I learned in law school, which really wasn't super helpful in my day-to-day practice. It was helpful in how you think and how you write and how you research. That was very helpful. But my day-to-day job, almost all of it was on-the-job training. And so from the outset, it is, and most large law firms are like this. Your first couple of years, it's just on the job training. You know, they hire bright, talented people and then teach them, you know, whatever it is they need to teach them.
All right, looks like we're 5 o'clock. I'll turn the time back over to you, Andrea.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dan, for leading us through that Q&A. And Tyler, thank you so much. I mean, I learned so much about real estate law, even as the daughter of someone who dealt with some, you know, law disputes over real estate. It's fascinating to me and amazing to think about how much work goes into something like the City Creek project. And I think it's really wonderful that students today have had the chance to sort of get an insider glimpse into that world, as well as to really think about all the information that, as you point out, you have to learn to synthesize. But we're pleased to hear that, you know, you praise things like reading and writing and identifying issues and synthesizing information, because we think that is the type of, you know, skill set we give to our students. And we hope that your story will inspire students to consider their options and decide whether law school is something that might be right for them. So thank you as well for your important information about law school and considering the location before you make that decision. We're just so pleased that you could spend some time with us today.
Of course. Yeah. And if there's any student or whatever that has any follow-up questions or whatever, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help or chat or whatever else. So you can find me on the internet pretty quickly. Tyler Buswell at Kirton McConkie.
Well, thank you so much, Tyler. We appreciate that. And I'm going to close today by reminding our audience about some upcoming events. In April, we will close out the pre-law series for the spring semester with Tristan Smith. He is an insurance attorney with State Farm. So come back and join us on April 6th at 4 p.m. We'll be talking to Tristan then. And I also want to mention, you know, if you have questions about the series or need help making connections with someone like Tyler, you're welcome to reach out to me or to Dan. And we appreciate our audience for taking the time to speak with us today, to share your questions. And Tyler, thank you again so much for sharing your expertise. And with that, I'm going to wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. And I hope you'll be back to join us for our next series in April. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.